There we go. Supposed to let everybody know that we're recording so you don't use any bad swear words. And if you tell any bad jokes, you have to remember not to run for public office. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the news at all. I've just been, I've been getting a number of emails, and I'm sure Joey has too, about what's going on with the previous president of the university and some toxic work environment stuff. Evidently, he had done a tasteless practical joke for somebody and denied it, and now it's coming back to bite him in the butt. And then the dean of the department, Dean Jarvis, just wants everybody to know that as faculty and as a school, we are here to support you guys in your successful education. And it's interesting to me, in the art department, I have never witnessed anything approaching a toxic work environment. I mean, I've met dumb people, but there's dumb people everywhere. And but none of the faculty are dumb, and none of the students are dumb. And I really appreciate that quite a bit. I worked at a certain religious university for, I was there for quite a long time. I was a professor for about 10 years there or so. And I'm I have experience being within a toxic work environment. And what we have here at Utah Tech is not one. My friend Chuck, who is the head of facilities maintenance in the North Commons building, said that the students that he sees now are the happiest and most successful students he's seen in the 20 years of his career here at Utah Tech. And I think that a big part of that is because the faculty is very supportive, but a bigger part of that is that the students are not idiots. I really appreciate you guys. All of you are functioning professionals. All of you work hard to be where you're at. And it creates a really nice synergy, I think. So I think that the misdeed of the university president, I don't have any official opinion, but I want to say a completely hypothetical thing for a completely hypothetical, non-real potential situation. If you are in a position where you are head of a university and donations and grants come to your school and state funding comes to your school because of your professionalism, and you do something that is immature and stupid, you are threatening the well-being of everybody at the university, or the financial well-being of everybody at the university. So just regardless of what that stupid thing is, you should be professional enough not to do it. So, or at least, not to do it. I think that's a good.
I was going to throw an amen after all of that. Well said.
Special thanks to Brittany Walker. She's the one who reminded me that we had class this week. So just everybody tell her thank you when you see her.
Not because I wanted to cause work for everybody, just because I wanted to know if I was missing something.
Yeah, whatever. I do appreciate the sycophantic overachievers. I don't mind that at all. My daughters are all like that, and I'm like that too. So, way to go. No, I'm just kidding. I really appreciate Brittany, you staying on top of things and reminding me about that. What we're going to be doing for the rest of the term is this is the last of the real actual modules with new information. And the rest of the term, like next week, we actually will be meeting, but we'll be meeting on Tuesday at 5:30, and I'll make that change after we're done tonight. But we will meet and go over some of the submitted projects that people have done, and answer questions and make sure that everything is caught up grading wise. Okay. So I'm sorry, the stupid dog. Hold on. You guys probably can't hear her. Ayla, cut it out. She loves barking at people when they go by, but it's always girls that are under 7. She thinks she's being friendly, and it terrifies them. So it's Ayla. Okay, I'm gonna get something edible for her to eat so I can trap her inside. But so and I'm sorry about the light. I'm walking around, but that's my plan for the rest of the term, and I want to do that because this class, instead of quizzes and tests, you guys have weekly reflections and projects. That's the assessment model I've chosen just because I'm an artist. I'm not an art historian. So I know it's different. I know it can be a struggle, but I want to have some time at the end of the term for everybody to get caught up. Let's see, I'm still walking to get the dumb dog. Hey, you want this? Oh, well. I may have to get up again and let her inside, but if she's going to be a fathead, there's nothing I can do about it. Does that sound okay with all you guys? We're just going to spend no more weekly reflections. And of course, it is only a matter of a couple weeks, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to get everything done and caught up. I think that, especially since the final capstone project, it represents a significantly greater amount of work than the other projects you've done. And I also thought it would be good to kind of review some of the projects that people have turned in as well. Just looked at what other people are doing. Does all that sound okay with you guys? Okay. I also wanted to talk about what the close of the semester is going to look like. Excuse me. I'm going to leave the screen for just a bit because I'm going to go and I'm not going to kick the dog or hurt the dog. I'm just going to wrestle with her and bring her inside. She's really irritating. What the rest of the or what the final will look like is that everybody will need to do, in addition to the final capstone, we will have a final for the class. All of the courses are required to have a final, and this is no different. However, our final is going to be quite a bit different. What we are going to do, and Joey and Jacob, you sat through them before. What it essentially is an essay that you'll need to write. And I have 4 questions, and you'll need to answer each of the 4 questions. If you keep the minimum word, if you match the minimum word count and answer the actual questions, then you pretty much pass the final. The only real stipulation is that I will open it on the morning of the first day of finals, and it will close on the evening of the last day of finals. So you'll have 5 days to do it. The other thing is, if you do it at the beginning and you miss any points, you will have time to look at that and resubmit it by the end of the finals week. All right. And that is in addition to the final capstone project. Okay. Hopefully we'll be able to look at some people have been turning them in, and we'll be able to look at some of them next week. So again, next week on Tuesday, we will be meeting instead of Thursday because hopefully all of you guys will have better things to do on Thursday. Let's see. Okay. And again, the final for the class, I will release it on the first day of finals week, and it will be closed on the last and midnight on the last day of finals week. Does anybody remember what the week of finals is? Is it December 5th through 12th or what? Which?
I mean, I know the semester ends on December 11th ish, so it should probably be within that time. Let me go actually look at the semester schedule.
Starts on December 9th.
December 9th?
Is the week of finals.
Okay, is that Monday?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Monday the 9th.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Friday the 13th is, we have one in December. Excellent. Okay, so on the morning of the 9th, I will release that. I will open that assignment, and then you'll have 5 days to do it. All righty? That makes sense. Now, up until about 800 years ago, Friday the 13th was actually a really lucky day. 13 is a sacred number, and Friday is the day of the week that is associated with Freya, or the planet Venus, represents the sacred feminine. And both those things were propitious when they came together. Propitious is a long college level word that means good. And on Friday the 13th in April, towards the tail end of the Crusades, there were a group of Gnostic Christians living in France at a time when both the French government and the Catholic Church needed money. And I can't remember the exact year. It was in the 12th century. And two things happened when the French general with the Vatican supervisor decided to go in and kill all the men, women, and children that were Gnostic Christians. One is that one of the sub-commanders said, some of these people are bound to be good. How will we be able to tell them apart? And the famous quote had its birth, "We'll kill them all, let God sort it out." And I'm sure you've heard of that. And then the second thing that happened is that it was on a Friday the 13th. And that made Friday the 13th unlucky. Yes, Mark, did you have something?
Yes. Was this the Khazars?
I cannot remember.
I think the Khazars were the only Gnostic Christian group I know of, and I think that's kind of what happened to them. Maybe. Let's see. I'm trying to look at. Let's see. Let's see. Trying to find it.
Well, if you find it later, that's just fine. You can share it later. It's not really important. I was just rambling for a bit. So, but that's why Friday the 13th isn't lucky now, or considered to be, but it has never been before. And it's not a bad luck day. It's actually a really good day. The reason why 13 is a sacred number and why it's such a good number, we associate it with negative things, but for Christians, it's a really good number because it represents a full quorum. It's the 12 original apostles and Christ at the head. And that's why it's a positive number. All righty. I am going to share my screen and we're going to start talking about, remember, the bookends for this course are prehistorical art and Gothicism, or immediately pre-Renaissance. Those are the two bookends. And we've got last week we went over Japan, so we've kind of been all over the place. And a big part of that is I really don't like the idea that all history funnels towards one specific centricity. And so there is a proclivity for art history to, especially art history taught in the West, to angle everything towards the establishment of the Renaissance in Europe. And that's one of the reasons why we looked at, in Africa, we looked at South America, Central America, North America, we looked at Japan, we looked at Australia, we looked everywhere around the world, because everywhere people are, there is art. And if going back to Europe, what we are looking at is 12th century, 13th century, going into the 14th century. Specifically, we're ending at 1350, which is generally the year that we ascribe to the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. For Europeans, what are some of the big things that are happening right now? What ended basically in 1296? Do you guys remember? That was the end of the Last Crusade. People have just finished with 300 years of almost constant warfare. They're pretty tired of it. And one of the things that seems to happen at the beginning of every Renaissance is people come to their senses and realize that they can probably make more money and be more prosperous not fighting and killing people that are different than getting into wars. And this is just a completely anecdotal observation, but it does seem to hold pretty true. When Charlemagne finished making all the warlords in Europe agree to his rulership and finished making ties with the Catholic Church, so that he became the first Holy Roman Emperor. When it was in everybody's best interest to be friends with their neighbors, that's when the Carolingian Renaissance began, which I think is not a coincidence at all. When Constantine went to Turkey and made friends with all the people around him and started trading with them and inviting them to come to his home essentially and speak their language in the streets of his city, it became the town that he took over, Constantinople, became ridiculously prosperous. And the Eastern Roman Empire that he started lasted for over 1,000 years, which is, it's absurd. You look at the Ottomans; they started in about the 14th century, and they were the ones who kind of took over Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire, and they lasted for a good solid 600 years because, again, they were working with their neighbors. They were cross-pollinating with the people around them. And so as people returned to their homes after the Crusades in 1296, that was the end of the Crusades. But what is interesting to me is this has been going on, this kind of building up of Gothicism has been going on since people started getting back from the Crusades in about 1150. And it's just has been slowly building and building. And as more people go on crusades and come back, they have more extra world experience and have a broader view of what's going on. And as they get back, they bring those new ideas and new things that they saw into the realms that they lived in. And it really changes how people express themselves. What is really fascinating to me is they saw and experienced these things while they were in Turkey and North Africa. And they tried to recreate that, but it seems to me like they tried to recreate these things with the materials and symbols that they had in Europe. And so that's why we start getting these huge, gigantic Gothic cathedrals. They were inspired to build gigantic things because they saw the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. But what they knew was Carolingian architecture and Roman architecture. And so that was what they built on to create that. And I just think it's really fascinating. And I hope you'll see that when we look at some of the buildings and things. I really love this window. I was asked to do a reproduction of it for a ski chalet in Park City. It ended up turning out pretty well. But I love that because you look at, there's, even with this simple faces, there's a lot of emotion. But with these faces, what kind of artwork, what kind of region does that remind you of? These faces.
Mostly Byzantine.
Yeah, they look very Byzantine. And this is made in France, but the faces look very Byzantine. And it's interesting to me because most of the glass art from 12th and 13th century has that very Byzantine style of figure where it's long, tall, and slender, and has the large eyes and the almost iconographic faces that we saw that the Byzantines had done. Looking at this, I think Joseph appears a little bit beleaguered. Mary looks like she's about had it. And Jesus is thinking, I wonder what I can get into next. I don't know. I'm probably reading that into it, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's what they were actually thinking. But it's fascinating to me. You look at the big eyes on the horse. You look at how the fabric drapes are recorded. And we know that people knew what they were seeing. So artists are doing this because this is the convention of the time. And that convention seems to be a direct copy of, or very greatly informed by what was observed with the Byzantium while folks had been traveling through the Crusades. I think that's the best place that they could have seen it. A little bit in Eastern Italy as well, but in France, I think it's a lot more likely that the artist that saw this stuff firsthand probably saw it while on Crusades, as opposed to seeing it in Italy, because it was a little bit easier to sail on a ship than it was to climb over mountains. But I don't know. I could be wrong. All right. Now we looked at Byzantine, Carolingian, Islamic, and Viking styles in the Crusades. All that stuff is bubbling together to produce Gothic art and architecture. When we look at this is Notre Dame. This is an excellent work object of Gothic architecture, and there's some features about it that I think are kind of interesting that I want you to see. I don't know if you remember Carolingian architecture. Most of the churches that were Carolingian had the two towers, and they represented the church and the state, because Charlemagne was the first Holy Roman Emperor. He was the one designated as the guardian of the faithful by the Catholic Church. And so not only did he have the right to rule politically, but he also had the right to protect the people as a mantle from the divine. And so we have those two towers. And then you also see right here that the roof line right here, this is an equilateral triangle. So it's a 60-degree roof line, which also harkens back to the Carolingian architecture that we saw. Does anybody remember what the equilateral triangle means when used in this kind of architecture?
Let's see. In geometry, equilateral triangle means I think it means all sides are the same length.
Yeah, all sides are the same length. So what do you think this symbolized? We talked about that. Right? What's that?
The Trinity?
Yes, the Trinity. That's exactly right. Now, some of the things, so there is some of that going on, and we can see that. Some of the things to be mindful of with Gothic architecture is there's a lot more patterning and detail going on. there's a lot more of this kind of fanciful lace-like stonework. It's called tracery. And we can see the Roman influences with some of these half-round arches and things like that, and the stone and the overall stonework. You get a mix of these arches like this that are not quite the three-point arch that was very popular. They're kind of in between. This almost looks like what arches from what other part of the world that we've looked at. I don't think it has any reference directly to it, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Wadi arch. That's not what it is. What is interesting of this arch is it comes up here. There's a slight peak right here. It comes down here. It is not the three-point arch that we see a lot of the times, or that we have seen before with typical Western peaked arch. It's a little bit broader, but it is interesting to me that there are some things that are being brought in that are not Carolingian. They're from other stuff. And some of that is like right here, you have the dental molding, like the Crusader type work. Right along here, you have the crenellations, which is also Crusader. And a lot of these kinds of archwork and columns and stuff are really reminiscent of some of the North African stuff that the Crusaders may have passed through while they were on crusade. What is fascinating, one thing that's fascinating to me is this is when you really start seeing these huge windows like this. Remember, I mentioned that this lace work in stone is called tracery. And that's done specifically so that each of the panels can be a lot smaller and still be held in place. The reason why you're able to get this big of a stone window is because of the different lessons that these architects have applied to make the inside of the space really open and broad, and design the building itself so it is still strong enough to support the weight of the walls. And before Carolingian times, it was really hard to build a big building. And after people get back from crusades, they are inspired to make the buildings, the interiors, even ever bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is where you start getting ideas of applying external buttresses with things called flying buttresses. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I want to watch this video. This is a video where if it is not viewable in the class YouTube video, for whoever's watching a recording of this, I will include it in the attendance thing so you can watch it as well. But I would really like everybody to look at all these videos and stuff that I include in the module. Do the best you can. All right. So we're going to go ahead and watch this. I hate the ads. Okay, here we go. Okay, these pictures, some of the things I want you to recognize is what culture did these kinds of half-round arches? Do you guys remember? I'll give you a hint. It starts with R. And anybody who says pirate culture, I will slap.
Gotta be Romans.
Romans, that's right. It's the Romans. Does anybody remember what this kind of leaf is? What this specific leaf is? It's the acanthus. And the acanthus is important to both Muslim architecture and Christian architecture because in a desert environment, the acanthus grows within 4 to 6 feet above a source of water. And it represents, particularly in religious environments, it became a symbol for the goodness of God. And then you get this the thing that removes this from being Roman is this kind of column head. It's not the typical Corinthian column head that we see in later Roman stuff. Now, there are some things about, and we'll talk about this probably more a little bit later, but this, we can, there's some symbols here that we can see, even though we don't see any halos, we can still tell that this is a religious scene. How can we tell that this is a religious scene? What are these?
Angels?
Yeah, they're angels. These are wings. And they're not the little babies. They're not the little puntas. So, which means that they're messenger angels, and they are filling in for, or they're kind of a symbol for the idea that this central figure is supported by the power of God. So that's what that becomes a symbol for. All right, so let's go on with yeah, it's medieval art in 1 minute, but it's almost 2 minutes long. Go figure. I like this timeline. There's early Christian stuff. You notice that cuts into quite a bit of the tail end of the Western Roman Empire. Migration. This is where a lot of people are moving around throughout Europe, and it's not really a time period so much as an umbrella term for a process that took about 6 centuries. The Byzantine culture in the Far East lasted from when Constantine moved to Turkey to right after 100 years into the Renaissance. And this is where it starts getting interesting. The Romanesque period is from the beginning of the Crusades to about halfway through the Crusades. And the Gothic is halfway through the Crusades to the end of the Crusades. And that is not a coincidence whatsoever. A lot of people saw Roman architecture and Roman influence going to North Africa and the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean, and brought a lot of that stuff back with them. Because it didn't matter what country you were from in Europe, you got to the Mediterranean through France or Italy, and that's where you started getting influenced by Romans, and then you went to the Holy Land at the usually landing on the north coast of Africa and working your way east, but sometimes sailing a little bit closer, and so almost directly east. So you're going through Greece, and so you get a lot of that kind of influence as well. And because a big major stopping off point was in Turkey, and Constantine founded Turkey founded the Byzantium Empire on Roman architectural and artistic and governmental standards. That's where a lot of people had a lot of their contact. So coming back, and I think that's why we see a lot of Roman influence in both Romanesque and Gothic. I'm going to go deal with the dog really quick. So give me just a second. See if I can catch her. Okay. Sorry about that. I'll just let the dog bark because she thinks I want to play with her. Sigh. Okay. when you look at this and we see a lot of that very naturalistic art that we saw, with the heads being a little bit out of proportion, a little bit bigger, but this is the kind of art that really informed the Carolingian Renaissance that we saw. So it is pretty naturalistic. Where the distortion comes in, it's usually because that's what's necessary to tell the story. Okay, I think that's a pretty good kind of introduction to the whole thing. I would like to watch a couple other videos, if that's okay. We're getting into an area that's kind of cloudy. We're talking about Romanesque and Gothic. And it's interesting to me that sometimes people will separate them out, sometimes they don't. And what I want to do is talk about, I want you to watch all of these, but I think I want to watch just this one, introducing the Gothic arch. Or, let's see, sorry. There we go. Introducing the Gothic period. And then the other one is, sorry, right here, down here, Birth of the Gothic. I really like this one. This is one of the Smart Talk videos, if it's not too long.
Term is first used. Now we move on to Gothic art. And the term is first used by Giorgio Vasari, the first of the art historians during the late Renaissance. And it basically refers to the Gothic as barbaric and uncouth. But this is the great age of cathedral building. Although there's an increase in building programs, likely in part due to the rich economy, the Gothic period, especially during the 13th and 14th century.
Do you remember why the economy would be rich at this time?
Beginning of trade.
Yeah, people are actually forming alliances with the folks that they went over to fight with, and it's living alongside somebody is almost always more profitable than trying to fight them. I think that's worth remembering.
Is also a time of great turmoil. We're really in the last period of time before we start entering into the Renaissance. In regard to the great cathedrals being built, we see an impulse to create monumental and integrated spaces with an emphasis on verticality. And we're basically dealing with Europe again, primarily France, but a little bit of the Holy Roman Empire, a little bit of England. And as you see at this time, we still have Islam in southern Spain. The Holy Roman Empire is still pretty powerful. Venice is still separate. You'll notice Normandy has disappeared, the Normans, and been absorbed primarily into France. Now, there are a few characteristics that will separate the Gothic from the Romanesque, and it would do you well to write these down if you're...
Right, so the Roman is this half-round arch, and the Gothic tries a lot more to get closer to that three-point triangle, the equilateral triangle. And it's not always there, and some of that is due to building constraints, but a lot of the times it tries to get there. And it's this point allows for a lot more direct energy, direct weight to be distributed evenly down to the supports here without impinging on the integrity of the arch. This kind of round arch, you are limited in the amount of weight you can place it directly atop of it, because it is a little bit weaker than this when weight is applied directly from the top. And that is one of the reasons why you'll see multiple layers. Like you look at reproduction images, sorry, of the Colosseum in Rome, or when they're reproducing aqueducts and stuff like that, you'll see rows on rows on rows of arches built on top of each other. And one of the reasons why they're trying to do that is to minimize the weight that impacts the very top of the arch. And there has to be a lot of them. For this kind of peaked arch, you don't necessarily need to do that, because if you can imagine the weight going down here, it is distributed very quickly to the two supports on either side, while on this there is still quite a bit of weight that's in the center.
In my class, the Romanesque tends to use a rounded arch. The Gothic uses a pointed arch that is coming in from Islam. The Romanesque use a groin vault. Now, a groin vault is where two barrel vaults meet at a perpendicular angle. In the Gothic, we generally see rib vaults. Now, we started to see rib vaults at the end of the Romanesque, but it's primarily a Gothic characteristic. And with that rib vault, as you see in the illustration in the upper right, the material between the ribs is pretty much irrelevant. It's not actually structural, it's simply filling in, which means we have a lighter structure and we can create a taller cathedral. We also see vertical lines and emphasis on verticality. They want to draw the eye up, always drawing the eye up, because they're A, trying to make their cathedral seem taller, and B, trying to draw your eye to the heavens so that you think of the spiritual, of the divine.
Notice that with the Roman stuff, the roof line is fairly straightforward. With a lot of the Gothic stuff, there almost seems to be this reaching up, almost like a vertical lace effect. And I want to show you something that I think is really fascinating, that a lot of people were seeing at about this time, after they had, when they came across Islamic cultures. And we aren't really necessarily talking about this directly in the class, but I think it is interesting. And if you want to research it more, that would be absolutely fine. Let's see. I want to show this to you. This was really popular, starting around, I'm going to say about 1,000 or so, and the year 1000, and it became more and more popular. It really started showing, and I'm going to share this with you. These are all examples of Islamic ceilings, or Muslim designed ceilings that throughout the Middle East. It was specifically designed, these are ceilings, it was specifically designed to capture the eye and move your attention upwards. This kind of material is called, this kind of design work is called muqarnas, M-U-Q-A-R-N-A-S. And it is designed to look like three-dimensional lace draping down from heaven. That's what it's supposed to be. This is heaven reaching down to the people that are coming into the mosque. Now, look at that and how complicated some of this is. And this is like 1,000 years old. These guys really understood geometry. And if we go back and look at the video we were just seeing, there's a lot of these kind of points coming up, reaching into the heavens from the Gothic church, in the Gothic architecture. And my conjecture is this is one of those times when travelers saw that Muqarnas in the Middle East, and by the time they got home, and that's got them thinking about that kind of 3D attachment to heaven. And by the time they got home, they needed to use the tools that they had. And I wonder if this is reflective of a desire to reach towards heaven, and informed in part to what they had experienced through the Muqarnas that they had seen. And that's just something that I'm wondering. I can't help but think, because the timeline definitely fits. Because at this time in Europe, unless you were on crusades, you lived and died within 15 to 20 miles of your home. That's of where you were born. And so nobody got out. But being called up on crusade, being able to get, go halfway around the world and then come back, you saw a lot of things that you would never have encountered otherwise. I just think that that's interesting. I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
We also see flying buttresses, and we haven't seen flying buttresses since the 1985 Bears, but leaving that aside, what flying buttresses allow us to do is create a higher roof. And that's because these are going to act to push back against those walls, to take those forces, that weight out to the exterior of the.
Now, if you remember with the Hagia Sophia, what do you guys remember what supported the weight of the dome, the high dome in the Hagia Sophia?
Wasn't it just a regular buttress?
Yeah, it was these huge piers going up. Yeah, exactly. And some of the weight was distributed by cascading things out with buttress buildings to kind of support the weight of the dome. And what they're doing here is that same kind of thing, but instead of using those piers and the buttresses like we saw in Turkey, they're taking it completely outside. And this just makes me think of, again, lace. And I wonder, it almost seems to me like it is this kind of idea, the Muqarnas idea, inside out, where this is on the inside of a building, and the high ceilings are supported by those interior piers and interior buttresses, and then the Gothic work, all that lacy type stuff, is on the outside of the building. And you can kind of see how, or you can kind of imagine how the weight would be transported from the wall that this is attached through, through these arches. And maybe the water is transported through here, but through the way that these curves are established really helps to transmit the weight from the height of the church through these flying buttresses and into these exterior piers like this. I think that that's really interesting.
Building without needing the walls. So if the walls are being made up, if the function of the walls is being made up by flying buttresses, that means we don't need walls, which means we can have walls of glass. Huge walls of glass. There is more light in a Gothic cathedral than any other structure at the time. And you have to imagine how miraculous this is when you're used to living in a fairly small home with maybe one window. Windows are very expensive. Glass is very expensive. So this becomes miraculous. And the light coming into the cathedrals to them symbolizes God's presence within the structure. We also see rose windows, which are round windows. Usually these are going to be in the western facade, although we'll see them at different churches in the transepts and elsewhere. But they are a really spectacular piece, frequently really a centerpiece of these churches. And finally, we see what's called a deep portal. So in other words, instead of
Okay, I want to I'm going to try to be really sensitive about this with the nomenclature, but this deep portal represents the principal entry into the church. And there's some really interesting things that seem consistent with the Gothic use of this deep portal. Now, you see what kind of arch, this arch that it has. And right here, this is a 3-point arch right here. So the bottom of it is about right there. I'm sorry. This is a 3-point arch derived from a vesica piscis. And the vesica piscis is 2 overlapped circles. All right. And what's interesting to me is that shape we can see in a lot of paintings, like we saw with we can see this with Hildegard von Bingen. There is something called a mandorla, which is an almond-shaped figure that surrounds sacred beings in spiritual art. See this shape right here? It's also called a vesica piscis, which means fish bladder, and it is just 2 overlapping circles. They represent 2 circles that where the edge of one touches the center of the other. That's what it's designed to represent. It's not geometrically, it's not always like that, but this represents a portal into the heavenly realm. Right? Can you see this, guys? Okay, it is called a mandorla, mandorla. What is interesting about it is that this is also a very ancient symbol for the vaginal opening, or the yoni. And it's fascinating to me that's the case, because then it represents both Christ being born eternally from the Queen of Heaven, as well as this is an opening into the heavenly realm. So if we go back and look at this deep portal, and somebody's going to church in this, yet on one hand, they are walking through the same portal that they've seen all those images of godly beings coming through. This is a very literal portal into heaven. It represents the path to heaven. But it also, because of its shape, is reminiscent both on the one hand of those divine feminine cave structures that we saw at the very beginning of the class, where they found that the Venus statuettes, and it also represents that the lingam or vaginal opening, or not lingam, the yoni or vaginal opening. And it's really fascinating to me that they're doing this, because I'd be willing to bet that you would get a broken nose if you said that to anybody. If you went to Cathedral Reims or anything like that and said any of this, somebody would want to break your jaw. But it's fascinating to me that this is the kind of symbolism that our ancestors used in this, because they're reminding people, what is the big thing about the Christian church? What is everybody required to do when they become a Christian? And it starts with a B.
Baptism.
Yes, every Christian is required to be baptized, and that is a rebirth. The church is set up to celebrate baptism and rebirth constantly. That's what the doctrines are that are taught to people are all about. And you get the Eucharist or sacrament is designed to also be a weekly rebirth of the person. So it makes sense to me that this portal represents both the yoni as well as that portal into heaven. Now, did I hurt anybody's sensitivities saying all that? Joey, are you damaged? I'm sorry.
Shook.
Shook? Okay. It may take a few years. But so let's listen to the rest of this. It's only another half a minute.
Simply a door in the facade. They're going to build almost this cave leading up to that door. And that cave is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper with time as we move towards the high Gothic. So these are your primary characteristics and things you're going to want to be looking for, amongst other things, with Gothic cathedrals.
And I want to share this as well. This, I think, is a good, let's see, here we go. This is a good overview of Gothic style, and you can see a lot of how it's represented in a lot of different media. Of course, this is, it looks like ivory, and it's all carved. I don't know what these stories are, but what do you think these stories are about? You know, looking at this setting, looking at the different kinds of symbols that you can see, like right here, what do you think these stories are about? And I will give you a hint. It's celebrated usually in April every year, April or the end of March.
Easter.
Easter, exactly right. And from our knowledge, we say, okay, this is a Gothic representation. We have this kind of upward reaching, lacy kind of stuff going on. We have this depiction of or not even, it's not even a depiction of a rose window, but it's kind of a symbolic representation of that. We have the post-Crusade crenellations at the top. So we know that this represents Gothic architecture. And we have this, what kind of arch is this? Is it a Roman arch?
A Gothic pointed arch.
Yes, it's a Gothic pointed arch. And these happen to be three-point arches, all of these. And like Mark said, the three-point arch represents the Trinity. And this is emphasized as well. This shape right here, it was a geometrical addition to that three-point arch to kind of underscore and remind you of the attachment to the Trinity. So here we see that this is John the Revelator, and I believe it's John the Revelator. It might be Mary, the mother of Christ, and it looks like this is Mary, Martha, and Mary Magdalene. But they're wrapping up. She's putting oil in the tomb, and so this is the burial of Christ. And here, who's this figure, and who's this? What do you think this scene represents? It doesn't narrow it down much, but I'll give you a hint. This is one of the Marys. And if we're talking about Easter, what does that scene remind you of?
It's a resurrection.
Yeah, it's the morning of the resurrection when the first person that the resurrected Christ introduced himself to was Mary Magdalene. So that's who that is. And then we have everybody celebrating because they realize that he's back. And then who's this guy? Can anybody tell? Because of this setup, we know it's Easter. What's the name of this person? It starts with a T. This becomes a very famous small little vignette for Christians. It is the moment when Thomas didn't believe when his fellow apostles said that Christ came back, and that's when he got his label Doubting Thomas. It wasn't because he didn't have faith. It was because if he was going to sacrifice his life, he needed to have a physical witness of the resurrected Christ. And so this is when Jesus is telling him to feel the marks in his palms and put his hand in his side. So the name of this guy is Thomas. And then this is at the end of all that where Christ rises up to the heavens. And then this represents everybody coming together for the day of Pentecost. Right? Does that make sense when you see it, knowing what you know about iconography? You know, when we looked at the Eastern Orthodox Christians and stuff like that. Does that make sense to you? Okay. And one of the reasons why there was such a huge birth or resurgence of glasswork was because people were able to build these gigantic, large, huge structures without needing the piers in the walls like the Carolingians did and like the earlier Byzantines did. You know, they were able to use those flying buttresses that Joey mentioned, help them so that the walls were almost secondary because the thing that supported the building were the buttresses. And that made it so that they could fill those wall spaces with light transmitting windows. And there's a lot of different technologies here that I think are really fascinating. The glass has to be heated up to about 2,400 degrees. So they had to have a significant technology that generated significant heat for significant lengths of time. And then these colors are actually polymer technologies, which nobody believed they were polymer technologies until NASA took a look at what was going on. This is a silver stain. That's how they got the yellow. And then this red is made with a gold oxide. And the black is usually made with some rather toxic materials. There is a reason why the glassworking families in Europe have some of the highest rates of mental illness over the last 1,000 years. And this is a model of the Notre Dame. And so it is a 19th century model, but this shows, you know, what Notre Dame looked like pre-fire. And there's some interesting things about this that we talked about. Like you have that Carolingian 3-point arch. You have what appears to be some Roman influence, you know, a little bit here and there. But for the most part, we look at these things and it looks like there's stuff from the Crusades, but you get these peaks, these arches over and over again. And I think that this model is a really good example of that kind of upward reaching stone lace that I was alluding to earlier, where in masjids or mosques, that is pointing down in the Makarnas and it's coming to the inside of the mosque. For these cathedrals, it was pointing up to the heavens on the exterior of the mosque. And then you also have these portals to get inside, which represent, does anybody want to be brave enough to say what the two things are that these portals represent? One starts with an M and one does not. I'll start with the one. It's
I'm sorry, I'm too slow.
Oh no, go for it. What were you going to say?
So it's Mandorla, right?
Mandorla, yes.
Is it Mandorla?
Mandorla, yeah.
Mandorla, and then the other is a representation of the sacred feminine.
Yes, absolutely. That's the two things. And remember in the video, what does this round window as a symbol of? What does it represent? Does anybody remember? That is a representation of the Queen of Heaven, Mary. And that's why the rose windows were progressively more and more spectacular. Here's another drawing of how the stonework that leads the weight from the roof and the wall structures out to the outside. And here we see those Easter panels that we saw at the beginning. And then what is interesting about this is notice that there's 3 layers. Gothic artists were really good at using number symbolism. So when they're talking about the period of Christ's ministry, you know, this is when it's really formalized that he was 33 and a half years old when he died. So you have 33, a repetition of 3. Notice that there's on each panel, you have 3 things across, 3 things across, 3 things across. And on both panels, there's these 3 layers. And this is something that is done over and over again. And of course, everybody, I hope, knows by now what 3 represents. Then we look at here and we see, what are these little structures right here? Can anybody see what those are?
I'm going to guess a star.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Those are stars. And they represent a couple things. One, to call your mind to remember the heavens. That's where Jesus is now. That's where people want to go. That's where good Christians want to go. But what's interesting about the star, and this kind of stuff is exciting to me because I see it a lot as an artist. The 5-pointed star has shown up since prehistory, and it is an very truly ancient symbol, but it's a symbol for 2 things at the same time. And you can see this in Egyptian tomb painting, in the roofs of Egyptian tomb paintings as well. When the ancient Christians would pray, they did not pray like Christians do today. Christians today, well, you fold your arms or you put your hands together and you bow your head. That's not how ancient Christians did. In the first 3 centuries after the murder of Jesus, Christians, when they would pray, they would use something called the ARTH position. ARTH means public speaking or out loud. They would they would stand up, put their feet about shoulder width apart. They would put their hands out a little bit so that the palms were about waist level or maybe a little bit higher, and their arms were not next to their body, they're away from their body. And they would bow their head. Now, if you can imagine that you have 2 separated feet, 2 arms that are farther apart, and then your head, how many points is that?
Five, just like the star.
Exactly. And so when we look at the star, a lot of the times in Christian art, you will see stars that are pointed upright. And it looks to me like they are there. They're also kind of stylized as leaves almost. So I think that they're there to just remind you that we're talking about the God of heaven. But in a lot of architecture, you'll see 5-pointed stars upright and 5-pointed stars that are pointed downwards. The upright star unilaterally represents the process of praying, and that's one of the reasons why those ancient Christians prayed like that in the Orient position, to mimic that upward pointing star. And if that's the case, the upward pointing star is praying, what do you think the downward pointing star represents?
I can only picture heavy metal references.
Well, the tradition is the upward pointed star represents prayer. The downward pointed star represents the answer. So you will see in a lot of these ancient churches, you'll see upside down stars. That is not a symbol of Satanism. All right. I want everybody to be completely clear. The ideas, the symbols that we have today that we associate with Satanism are based on Aleister Crowley, the coolification of non-Christian religion at the end of the 19th century, making non-Christian religion awesome and groovy for everybody, and the birth of Hollywood. Hollywood designers in the silent film days needed some sort of visual iconography so that people would recognize when magic was involved. And that's when a lot of these out of context symbols started being surfacing. You get a little bit before that, in the 14th and 15th centuries, a lot of alchemists would use these ancient Christian and Jewish and Muslim symbols to make it so that the only people that could read their work would be people that already kind of sort of knew what was going on. And the Catholic Church was trying to govern how people were educated. And so instead of giving people a set of reference points to determine what things were Christian and what symbols meant, it was just taught widely And I don't think this came from the top. I think it was just something that kind of organically emerged. It was taught widely that these were references to non-godly things, which they definitely were not. For example, the symbol of Baphomet that you see is actually based on some really old references for the process of gaining divine wisdom. The goat is used as an ancient reference to the Old Testament and the prefiguring of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. Do you know what story I'm talking about? When Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac, that is considered to be a story or a typology of the God sacrificing his son, Jesus Christ. What saved Isaac? What did Abraham sacrifice instead?
A lamb?
A goat.
Oh, goat, right.
Yeah, it was a ram caught in a thicket. It was a male goat. And so that goat became a symbol of divine sacrifice and a connection to divine wisdom. So if you have stars, and especially an upside down star, associated with a goat, what that actually means is reference to prayer and inspiration or the divine answer and that sacrifice to save the life of Isaac. And it's a representation of the divine search or the search for divine wisdom. Isn't that interesting? And it's gotten so twisted up just because of misinformation and Hollywood needing something to communicate easily. And so a lot of the yellows is going to be silver stain. A lot of the blues are going to be cobalt or cupric oxides. And a lot of the reds are going to be gold oxides. Right? But the reason why you start seeing stained glass so broadly across Europe was because they wanted to bring that beautiful light in to the center of the church, which is a gorgeous symbol for the spiritual process visited through the best forms of religion. And then we see baby Jesus tearing the wings off a dove. It's absolutely horrible. But this kind of symbolism is very prevalent. What figure is this? Who is this person all the time? Almost all the time.
Mary.
Mary. And if there are two women with babies in their laps, one is going to be Mary and the other is going to be her sister who gave birth to John. And the two babies are going to be Jesus and John. But in this case, because it's a singular figure, this is Mary, then this is the baby Jesus. And does anybody remember why he looks distorted?
I believe it's the emphasize of the wisdom.
Yes, exactly. The infant baby Jesus, they knew how to make baby. They knew how to make babies, obviously, but they knew how to depict babies. And the reason why baby Jesus looks like an angry old man is because he was born in Orthodoxy. It's believed that he was born with all the divine knowledge that he had as an adult because he was a perfect being. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And he's not really pulling the wings off this poor bird. He actually represents the Holy Ghost. So some very, very cool stuff that we can see. All right. And I'm getting back to I'm sorry, I get excited and I start going on. I want to share with you some examples of architecture. Now, to remind you, this is what I'm talking about. These piers carry the weight of the dome. And the reason why Byzantine architecture looked like it did is because they built all these buildings in cascadingly smaller sizes to carry the weight of this out. So it kind of limits the size of the windows that you can have in the structure because all of this extra architectural building is designed to carry the weight of the dome. So you have absurdly high ceilings, ridiculously high. And I believe I told you that the Statue of Liberty can stand inside of this. And it was so high that clouds historically people witness clouds forming. And with Gothic architecture, I think that they're trying to look back at that with the tools that they have, and they're creating different solutions as well. And so they're working with the pointed arch instead of the rounded arch, like Constantine did. And they have these buttresses to carry the weight out. These are called flying buttresses because there's space in between them, and a lot of that weight is in these flying portions, the upper levels. That's where the weight is distributed to these exterior piers. Can you see the difference between this form and this right here? Can everybody see how different that is? Okay. And this is kind of a fun video to watch. I would like you guys to watch it. It shows you the how to draw these kind of Gothic arches. And it really drives home that idea of the three-point arch, which again, it's the encapsulation of the perfect, what's it called? Unilateral triangle. That's not the word. All the sides are the same length, and it represents the Trinity. But I want to. Yeah. What's that?
I was just going to say the equilateral.
Equilateral. Thank you. Much better. Okay, and I want to show you how insane these guys were. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Look at what's going on. And you have this almost spider-like work coming up here. This is another thing that that leads me to believe that these guys were informed by those images of Muqarnas that we saw. You know, you look at this, and it just, this kind of geometry, this kind of lace, kind of drives your attention northward, it drives it upwards. And it's fascinating to me that it seems like they're doing that on the inside and then also on the outside. And it's one of those things where you walk into a building like this, your attention is constantly going up, and after a while, it's kind of like what happens to your body when you smile. You can't help but think of higher order things. You can't help but think of things that are beyond the ground. When you smile, your body automatically releases happy endorphins, which makes it so that you create a better mood for yourself. And it just happens automatically when you smile. And I can't help but think that when people walk into a building like this, as you start being entranced by the ceiling or the roof line when you're outside, it helps you to think of things beyond the mundane. Now here we see, this is a really good example of those flying buttresses. And you can see a lot of that roof line. Again, this is holdover from the Carolingians, that kind of straight equilateral triangle roof. And then you get that mandorla or yoni kind of archway. Now this is actually an echo of the entrance. This is not the entrance. The entrance is going to be underneath the rose window. And then you get these two pillars that have come to represent church and state. And these are not really pillars, they're towers on either side. This is considered to be very Romanesque, and I want to blow that up a little bit, and I think you can kind of see why, what the difference is. You see all these arches. Yeah, it does have that kind of crenellation stuff. It does have a little bit of decorative stuff on the ceiling or on the roof line, but all these arches are that half-round Roman-style arch. And they're based on that same kind of Roman-style architecture, which is why it's called Romanesque. So we've got characteristics, pointed arches. We've beat that to death. There's a lot of stained glass because behind each of these vertical lines are flying buttresses to support the weight of the building, so you don't need the central area of the wall. And that's where you see the flying buttresses. So glass and then the flying buttresses. And you can see in between where the buttresses attach themselves, you have the vertical rows of windows. And a creepy animation of somebody doing chair exercises. That's not part of That's not part of the website. And then you also have the rose windows. Do you guys remember what the rose window represents? What is the rose, or who is a rose window a symbol of?
Mary.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that you'll notice is that if you count these sections, they are always and separated by divided into multiples of either 3 or 4. And I don't know exactly. It is interesting to me that there is that difference. Like sometimes you'll have 24, you might have 32, but it's always represents multiples of 3s or 4s. 3 is obvious. I think the multiple of 3s is a representation of the divinity, of the Trinity. What do you think, like this one is in 16 sections, what do you think the multiples of 4 might represent?
The cardinal virtues.
There's 7 cardinal virtues, but
the
cardinal
4 ones.
directions. Yeah, the cardinal directions. And I think you're right, because as after the death of Christ, after the murder of Christ, you remember, I think it was Peter was given a series of visions where he was told to kill and eat, and it was a cloth that was held up by 4 corners that was dropped down in front of him with all the animals inside of it. And what it represented was, with the 4 corners of the cloth, represent the 4 corners of a map, and the term of the 4 corners of the world, or reference to the 4 cardinal directions. And I think it's a reference to the idea that Christianity is intended to be a Catholic or universal faith. That Catholic does not mean all the time like Catholic Church. Catholic actually is another word for universal. But then I like this too, vertical emphasis. It's always reaching upwards. And so we can see a lot of these examples of Gothic architecture. We also see a lot of the times these 2 towers, which represent, again, church and state. And you can see the buttresses coming out. This looks to me like it might be a little bit older example, simply because it feels to me like it has still some of that Byzantine kind of flavor to it, where you actually have buildings attached to support the weight as well, in addition to these buttresses. I think that's really interesting. This is a really beautiful example that ticks all the boxes, with a mandorla or yoni opening. And then here, I love this perspective. It really shows the upward reaching filigree of the stonework. Does anybody remember what framing like this is called when it's done in a stonework around stained glass? I used it at the very beginning of the class. Does anybody remember that word for this stonework is?
Is it tracery?
Tracery. That's right. Good job. Gold star stapled to your forehead next time I see you in the hallways. And I think now this does start getting a little bit insane and crazy when people start doing stuff. And then there's also Gothic revivals and all sorts of things. Remember the word Gothic, it actually is another word for German, and it represented barbaric structure. It was given to this style by a rather pompous art historian. And happy to say none of the art historians that I've met personally have ever been pompous in any way. But because the assumption was it was barbaric. And I look at this, and the only way I can see this as being barbaric is by somebody giving it a label who absolutely does not understand what's going on. Because it looks to me like these people are trying to build something that is almost like crystals reaching into heaven, growing upwards. And it just is astonishing to me. And here we see Romanesque, Gothic. You get now this one, it's a little bit hard to see because the camera angle is not the most flattering, but you can still see the peak arch right there, the points to the arches right here, that lace reaching up to heaven on the top. And here you have the very Roman arches. Now, and I was pontificating a bit and rambling on a bit about some really cool stuff that I thought was really cool, but I did want to touch on Gothic sculpture. And I really want you to go and look at what these videos, because I have in there Gothic music, as well as Gothic writing, Gothic painting, women artists of the Gothic period. One of my favorite Gothic women artists was a woman named Hildegard von Bingen. She is absolutely, absolutely astonishing. She was a woman who would have prophetic visions, paint them, and send letters to the Pope correcting the poor choices he made. Just an incredible lady. Really defined the genre of high medieval Gothic surrealism. So definitely watch this. This is, talks about stained glass and how it was made. And then this one is about one of the most beautiful structures in from the Gothic period. And I'm not sound on, and I just want to show it to you really quick until we see an image of it. Sainte-Chapelle, it is this little tiny thing. It's Sainte-Chapelle means Saint Chapel. Now, do you remember we looked at images of reliquaries a while ago? Do you guys remember that? Anybody remember? Okay, the reliquaries were these tiny boxes that held physical material that symbolized the divine life of the saints, or the divinely driven life of the saints, as a reminder, as both a focal point for you to venerate what good people have done before you, but also as a reminder that you have something worthwhile to aspire to. Now think about that. The Sainte-Chapelle, it is not a big church, but the walls, let's see if I'm going to try to get to a picture of it. There we go. The walls are nothing but glass. All of the structure is in these arches and in the buttresses supporting these vertical bands. So the whole thing is made out of glass. This, if you look at, okay, so hold this image in your mind, and we're going to go back to this other image, if I can find it here. This structure is designed to look like a reliquary. It's not designed to be a cathedral. It's designed to remind you of a reliquary box. And then you go on the inside and see these beautiful windows. When I went there, the message that I seemed to feel, or I felt that they were giving us, was that it was designed as a reliquary, where the relic is not a deceased saint's bone or a piece of the true cross. The relic is the person who goes inside this chapel to worship, which means that it's kind of a celebration of the person who's trying to make a better life for themselves and trying to follow the truly transformative principles of a faith. I think that's a remarkable idea for a building design. I just think that's amazing. So definitely go through there, and then for the weekly reflection, I wrote down at the bottom of it. I wrote down right here. Can everybody see this? The description of what you need to do for the video reflection. And from now to the rest of the term, refer to this, because if you are missing any of your weekly reflections, you can do a video weekly reflection. I only have a couple minutes left, but I want to go over that really, really quickly. It can't be shorter than 3 minutes. It needs to be, and it should not be much longer than 5 minutes. So 3 to 5 minutes is the sweet spot. It needs to be recorded as an MOV, MP4, or WAV file. And that file needs to be submitted. Now, I'm saying all this to make it easy to submit and get credit on, because if you submit this through your phone, it's going to put it into a file that I can't access, and it's also going to put permission requirements on it, so I can't access it. And if that happens, I'll just send you a note and say I can't grade it until it follows these requirements. And the easiest way to do that is like what I am doing right now. I am recording a Zoom meeting and I'm sharing my screen with you. So in this case, what I would do is if I wanted to talk about the mandorla or and what I learned about the yoni opening into the cathedrals, I would do my talking while I had one of these images full size on the screen. And what you're going to do is talk about what the week is, what the module is, just really quickly introduce it. Say, I found this image in the module and I wanted to talk about this. Or if you want to do more than one image, that's fine too. If you speak fast, you may need to do 2 images. And then you're going to talk about it using the 4 tools of artistic critique. You guys remember what the 4 tools of artistic critique are? First one starts with a D. What is that?
Describe.
Describe. Excellent. The second one starts with A. What is that one?
Analyze.
Analyze. Perfect. The third one starts with I. What is that one? Anybody? Somebody wants to go in their module and look, or go into class and look up the very beginning module. There's the tools of artistic critique, and that lists all 4 of them. But what is the third tool?
Interpret.
Interpret. Excellent. And then what is the final tool? E.
Evaluation.
Evaluation. Excellent. Perfect. So you do that for 3 to 5 minutes. And if you need citations other than what you're just talking about, you need to type them on a separate document, and you'll submit both the video recording in one of these 3 file formats plus the typed up citation. But for this kind of thing, if you're just applying the tools of artistic critique to one of the images you found in the module, you don't need an exterior citation or a citation to an exterior source. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? So use that to catch up on whatever weekly reflections you're missing. I think you'll have a total of 14 reflections when you're all done. And we're not going to have any more reflections for the rest of the semester. We're just going to be talking about the different things that we did and talk about what different people's projects so we can see them. All right. Unless you guys really want me to do a 15th module, I'd be happy to do that. I know that Aubrey has been emailing me for the last week and a half, begging that I would require 2 more discovery and research projects and 2 more weekly reflections. And I have been disappointing her by saying no. And I'm sorry, Aubrey, if you really want to do that, you can do it on your own, but I don't think I want to make it a requirement for the whole class. So I'm sorry.
Thank you, though.
Wouldn't that be horrible? Okay. Any questions or observations before we tie it up for tonight? All right. Then I will hope everybody has a wonderful week and weekend. I will look forward to seeing you next week on Tuesday rather than Thursday. And I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful Thanksgiving. And remember, when you're with your family and loved ones, do not talk about politics or religion. Anything else is fair game. No, don't talk about sex ed, politics, or religion. None of those 3 things.
How about we talk about all 3 and record it and share it with the class?
Oh yeah, if you want to do that, if this is a group of people you never want to visit again, that'd be awesome.
Hey, I wonder. Sorry, I should have said this earlier, but I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if some of these Gothic cathedrals are just still going through a phase. If they're actually Gothic. Just kidding. Don't. That was a dumb joke.
I got it.
That reminds me, they're doing a remake of Nosferatu. That's pretty exciting. Now, I think that eventually they'll grow out, and a lot of the piercings are becoming more societally acceptable. So the more contemporary cathedrals, they do appear a little bit more less self-centered and more mature, in their design. So just.
So it wasn't just a phase; it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle. No, two of my daughters are goths, and it's irritating because I always thought goths were supposed to be depressing, and these are the happiest people I know. And it is, I love seeing the bubbly goth. It's not a combo that happens very often. All right, guys, have a wonderful weekend, and I will see y'all on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Hey, I